This is my star on the walk in front of the Palm Springs Art Museum. I'm a UCLA dropout.
From North Carolina?
From North Carolina. This portrait of John on the wall is by a famous British photographer called Bill Brandt. It was taken at our house in London. It's a very strong, beautiful portrait with a gorgeous print. And it really portrays the strength of John. And this is my partner who I live with for 37 years. And I met him in Los Angeles, set up on a blind date by John's friend, Kay Ballard. And she said, would you go to the Beverly Wilshire Hotel tomorrow night and meet him for drinks? He's lonely, he's in LA. He wants somebody young to show him around town and show him all the places. And I said, John Schlesinger, the British director who did Darling with Julie Christie. I saw it 5 times. I said, of course I'll go. I'd love to meet him. Because I was a film student at UCLA then. So that afternoon, I happened to go by a newsstand and pick up Time magazine. There was an interview about John, or with John, and said he was often mercurial and difficult on the set. And I just thought, oh, darn, damn it. He's gonna be a nightmare, a nightmare. So I called an actor friend of mine. I said, would you go with me to the Beverly Wilshire Hotel bar and to meet John Schlesinger? And I said, 1 kick means let's get out of here. 2 kicks mean you get out of here. And it was 2 kicks. I stayed. He was charming, funny, brilliant, an extraordinary man. It was the beginning of our relationship. And it also didn't hurt that night, his friend Lee Remick came into the bar, and John said, darling, Lee, what are you doing in LA? She lived in London. And Lee Remick said, I'm here to meet my leading man on my next movie, I guess, to audition for. And John said, well, who is that, darling? And she started to say, and in walked Frank Sinatra. So Frank Sinatra came over to meet Lee, say hello, meet John Schlesinger. I was introduced to Frank Sinatra. This is my first unofficial date with John at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel and with Lee Remick and Frank Sinatra. I said, you know, I could get used to this sort of life. This is a pretty good thing. The good life in Hollywood might be attractive. Being a student at UCLA, making $100 for a photo session, doing young pop stars and young actors. So that's how it all began, and John and I started seeing each other, dating, and he asked me to go work on Midnight Cowboy in New York, and I said, what's Midnight Cowboy? And I said, is it a Western with John Wayne? He said, hardly. Here, you read the script tonight and tell me what you think tomorrow. I read it. It was wild movie. I said, how can you make this movie? It's so extraordinary and over the top for the times and X-rated. And I said, I'm going to make it. I said, it's going to be a great movie. The photograph of David Hockney floating in Rising Glen Pool has become an iconic photograph over the years. It's been reprinted in books and magazines. In fact, Peter Fetterman, the great gallery owner in Santa Monica, said it's the most iconic photograph ever taken of David Hockney and of a modern artist. And that's a great compliment. I tell you how it happened. I had this picture from a book of the great Lartigue, and it was a photograph taken in 1903 of Zézou, his cousin, in a French pool. And it's a classic, iconic photo. And I sort of wanted to recreate that with a Hockney pool, with a Hockney image, because that's what Hockney is known for, California swimming pools. And I showed it to David, and he said, does that mean I have to get my suit wet? He had a brand new $12,000 Savile Row white linen suit. I said, David, we'll do our best to keep you dry. And He's a wonderful, wonderful man, and with a great sense of humor, and he agreed to do the shot. Bette Midler, 1978, in Hollywood, California. She had an album coming up. I was a cover photographer for George Harrell, who had been very ill. And my wonderful agent, Marisa Meslansky, said, can you come in and cover and do cover shots, just in case George gets ill and can't finish the session. So I did. I'd known Bette since 1968, when John and I went to upstairs and the downstairs and discovered her. And she trusted me. I could get in close, I could get in far. She knew she was always going to look good with my lighting. And she's been a friend for years. She's appeared in two of my big spectacular shows and is an extraordinary and unique human being. Andy in Fur was taken in his Union Square studio, and they are in early 70s. And I'd photographed Andy several times, including once at his house in Paris, which no one was allowed to photograph in. In fact, the Andy Warhol Museum says that they think I'm the only photographer who photographed him there, because Andy was trying to hide it from the IRS that he had a house in Paris. But this photograph, I came along with a friend of mine, Patrick Reynolds, who was the heir to the R.J. Reynolds tobacco fortune, who was wearing this glorious wolf jacket coat. And Andy admired it and said, oh my God, that's wonderful. Where did you get that from? And then I said, Patrick and Andy, could you wear it? And he said, yes, I'd love to wear it. So that's how we got Andy in Fur, another iconic photograph of a great artist. Catherine Deneuve was in Los Angeles, and I had an assignment for Los Angeles Magazine to do a cover, and an assignment from Perry Match to do a cover on her. And this is rather unusual photograph. This was not the cover, but it's a very sad Catherine Deneuve, very pensive. And what was actually happening at that moment is that I knew and had met her sister, Françoise Dorliac, through my friend Jacques Demy. Her sister was a wonderful actress. In fact, she was on her way to becoming the most famous French star, not Catherine. Sadly, Françoise was killed in a car crash. And I was talking about her beautiful sister, and she started a little tear in her eye. So she looked away, and if you come up close to the photograph, there's a little tear in her eye. So it's a very different, strong, pensive photograph of the great Catherine Deneuve. Joe Dallas Sandra, I met Joe at Max's Kansas City with Paul Morrissey when I was hanging out there looking for actors and extras to be in Midnight Cowboy. Joe had the iconic look of the late 60s and was world famous because of the Andy Warhol movies that he starred in. And I asked Joe to do this session at my studio over on 7th Avenue in New York, and we had the strongest wind machine in New York there, and his hair was incredible. Just and so, what a beautiful face and a beautiful spirit. And I've kept in contact with Joe for the last 45 years. He's a wonderful, sweet, very generous man. But this is probably my most iconic photograph of all time. It's appeared in hundreds of magazines and in books. Very proud of it. I'd known Gore Vidal for many years, since the 70s, and had stayed at his house in Ravello and knew he and Howard. An extraordinary, brilliant man. What a great mind. I photographed him for my Author series. I wanted Gore Vidal now at that time, and knowing it'd be one of the last times he'd ever be photographed. In fact, this is the last photograph, a formal photograph, a portrait taken of Gore, because he died about a month later. This was taken up at his house at Outpost Drive in Los Angeles. I arrived early in the morning, as I was instructed to do, by Ernie, Mr. Vidal's butler assistant. And 9:30 in the morning, I saw this elder, curled up old man in a wheelchair, not the Gore I'd known all my life. And he was getting a haircut and getting a manicure, and it was Gore, and I went over to say hello to him. He said, I only want to do 2 shots, and he said, I want you to do the living room over there. I love this where Howard had placed all the art and the paintings and the antiques, and Howard was his partner who I knew. And so and he was drinking, instead of coffee at 9:30 in the morning, he was having a big glass of red wine. I thought, this could be fun, this could be interesting. So we got the first photograph done, and he said, I want you to do the second out on the terrace outside. It's a pergola, which is a copy from my house in Ravello that Howard and I had. And it was a beautiful pergola outside. And they took him in the wheelchair out there. And he said, Ernie, I need some vodka. Come now. And I said, Mr. Vidal, Ernie said, would you like it on the rocks or neat? He said, no, just pour it into the red wine. So the big glass of red wine was topped up with vodka. I knew this was going to be a good photo session, the end of it. It was extraordinary. Gore talked for half an hour about what he thought was happening with American politics, the end of the American empire, the collapse with Trump taking over America. He said, I want to die in Italy. I don't want to die in this country. This is not the country I loved and I knew. It's changed too much. And sadly, he died in Los Angeles. But at the end of the session, he was not a very demonstrative man, but he said, pull me forward, come here. And he pulled me forward, and he gave me a hug and said goodbye. And I looked, it was very close up, I looked in his eyes, and there were tears there. And I pulled away, and I thought, this is extraordinary, from Gore Vidal. That's the last time I ever saw Gore Vidal.